Hey guys, Jake from 80/20 Media here, back today to bring you some content on the 3.0 Duramax. Prior to 2019, if you wanted a diesel engine from GM, and mostly from any other manufacturer, whether it was Ford or Dodge, your only option was to get a 3/4 ton or a full ton big diesel truck and get the 6.6 liter Duramax engine within it. And so GM and all the other manufacturers noticed a gap in the marketplace for diesel engines within their half-ton, 1500 level trucks, and that's how we ended up with the 3-liter Duramax. So in 2019, GM released an inline-6 3-liter turbo diesel known as the 3.0 Duramax, and most commonly referred to as the LM2 engine code. It produces 277 horsepower and 460 feet-pound of torque. It's predominantly competing against the 5.3 Ecotec 3, which is the V8 engine that comes standard in the majority of 1500 series trucks, Suburbans, Yukons, and things of that nature. It actually provides less towing capacity than the 5.3 Ecotec, but it does provide significantly better fuel economy, and it provides a good bit more torque. And so it's a diesel alternative to the gas or V8s with better fuel economy, more torque, and what you would hope is better reliability, considering diesel engines tend to outlast their gas counterparts. However, we will get into the reliability part in a second. Also worth noting, there is a 2.8 liter Duramax that's used in the Colorado and Canyon, which are smaller trucks. Despite being similar in size and also being a Duramax, it's actually a very different engine. So back to the 3.0 Duramax. As of right now, the only 3.0s on the road are the LM2 engine codes. However, GM recently released a new 3.0 Duramax that will be used in 2023 and onwards models, and that is the LZ0. The LZ0 has a number of block and significant internal changes that were made to it, mostly to address some of the shortcomings and challenges with the LM2 design. In addition to those changes, it did receive a power boost to 305 horsepower and 495 feet of torque. So before we get into talking about the common problems and reliability issues, one of the most important things to note is what some of these challenges are with the LM2 and why GM is replacing it. So the biggest thing is it was designed with a timing chain driven system. However, the timing chain is rear mounted, so it sits at the back of the engine. And one of the issues is that a lot of these Silverado and Sierra trucks weren't necessarily manufactured for long inline-6 engines. They were manufactured for V8s, the 5.3 and the 6.2, and if you think about an inline-6 compared to a V8, it's 2 cylinders longer than a V8 engine is. And so accessing an inline-6 inside of these engine bays is very tight, and so putting a rear-mounted timing chain on it makes it extremely difficult to access the systems that are on the back of the engine. And that includes the cams, the camshaft position sensor, the high pressure fuel pump, and there's also a belt-driven oiling system that's also located on the back side of the engine. Challenges there is that, timing chain is a serviceable item that should probably be replaced every 150,000 miles. The oiling belt is required to be replaced every 150,000 miles. So to do that, it requires dropping the whole transmission from the vehicle. And depending on what service you're having done, sometimes the box and the cab actually needs to be removed as well. And so there are some serviceability issues with the LM2, which is a big reason for the change to the LZ0, which fixes a lot of these issues. However, moving into common problems with the 3.0 Duramax, The most prevalent one is a no start or long crank issue. This has somewhat mostly been resolved with an ECM update that fixed the issue. However, the camshaft position sensor is also another common cause of this problem. And as we just mentioned previously, accessing the camshaft position sensor requires dropping the whole transmission, and depending on what kind of cab you have, it requires removing the cab as well. And so while this problem isn't necessarily a huge one in terms of engine reliability or longevity, the fact that accessing the sensor is extremely difficult makes it a very expensive repair when we're talking about replacing a $50 sensor. The second thing is injector failure. Injectors are common maintenance items on any diesel engine and really on any direct injected engine. They operate under extremely high pressure, which causes them to frequently fail. On the 3.0 Duramax, I wouldn't say it's extremely common, but we have seen a couple cases of the injectors failing a little more quickly than you would hope. And injectors aren't, the least costly of maintenance items, and so it is relatively expensive to replace those as well. The third most common thing is with the EGR system, and more specifically the EGR cooler. So the 3.0 Duramax actually has a really good EGR system in that it uses a low pressure and what we call a downstream system, in that it pulls the exhaust gases after they've been filtered through the diesel particulate filter. And so once it passes through the DPF, it then gets rerouted back into the engine rather than getting rerouted before going through the DPF. And so the result is getting cleaner exhaust gases being recirculated back in your engine, which is good for various different types of carbon buildup and things like that. However, EGR systems are a huge problem on any diesel engine. They tend to be a really big problem on all of these kind of small diesels, not just for GM, but also for Ford and for Dodge. I think reason being they just haven't been around long enough to kind of perfect the system. But the EGR valve clogs up frequently, and the EGR cooler is very prone to cracking. And if you're familiar with EGR systems, replacing the EGR coolers in the EGR system is a relatively expensive replacement. And so again, not a very favorable problem to have on these engines. The last issue is with the high pressure fuel pump. This as well is something that I would consider a kind of common maintenance item on diesels as well as on direct injected vehicles. We have noticed it to fail a little bit more frequently than anticipated on the 3.0 Duramax, but again, the big issue here isn't necessarily with the fact that it fails, it's more so with the fact that accessing the high pressure fuel pump and replacing it requires dropping the transmission, and so it becomes a very expensive labor job as well. So those are kind of the main problems that we've seen so far with the 3.0 Duramax. That being said, it hasn't actually been out on the road that long, and so it's difficult to kind of pinpoint what are the major problems that are associated with it. But the fact that GM is already going with the second generation of the engine does kind of point to the inherent flaws that are within it, and mostly with the design of it. And so when it comes to a reliability perspective, the 3.0 Duramax isn't really that unreliable. It actually has pretty solid reliability. I'd probably give it anywhere from a 6 to 7 out of 10 in terms of reliability. However, when it comes to serviceability, that's where it gets probably a 2 out of 10. All of the common kind of issues that are associated with it are very expensive issues to take care of. And like I mentioned, you have maintenance intervals on both the timing chain and the oiling belt at 150,000 miles, and getting to those and servicing those is very expensive. And so while the reliability on this engine is significantly better than Dodge's 3.0 Eco Diesel, it's probably somewhat comparable to Ford's 3.0 Power Stroke. However, the maintenance costs and cost of ownership of the 3.0 Duramax are significantly more than what you would expect out of getting the 5.3 liter Ecotec. And so it's a solid engine, but very expensive to maintain. And when things do go wrong with it, it's very expensive to fix. So not a bad engine, but the costs of owning it, in my opinion, probably outweigh the added benefit that you get from the gas mileage or the reliability compared to the 5.3 Ecotec. So with that being said, that wraps up our video here. In the future, we will do a video on the differences between all of these 3-liter mini engines, as well as we'll compare the 3-liter to the 5.3 Ecotec. But this wraps up our common problems on the 3.0 Duramax. If you like this video, we'd appreciate it if you gave us a subscribe, as well as like the video. Appreciate all the support. We'll see you in the next video.